I think one of the most interesting crossroads for me is the intersection between psychology and philosophy. I think that our view of emotions can profoundly impact our view of ourselves and our overall happiness in life. For example, if I tell myself that I should feel a certain way, and I think that I'm bad if I don't feel that way, then this can lead to the problem of feeling guilty just merely for feeling a certain emotion. And I think that a organization or a set of ideas that really focuses on this view of emotions as emotions as indicators of moral goodness or badness, emotions as indicators of our moral status, is the religion of Christianity. Now, I grew up in the church as a Christian for well over a decade, and I believed in a variety of ideas. One of which is the idea that our emotions are a part of our sin nature. For example, if I felt hatred toward my enemies, that would be a sinful emotion. Now, there's several verses within Christianity that emphasize this view of emotions. One of them is Galatians 5:22 through 23, which focuses on the fruits of the Spirit, such as love and joy. And implied in this set of verses is the idea that we should feel such emotions because they're good for us. And in Romans 7:19, 19 and 20, then Paul talks about how his emotions prevent him from doing what he thinks he ought to do. And then King David over in Psalms 37:8, he talks about how we shouldn't feel feelings of wrath or hatred towards others. And I think nowhere better is this view of emotions exemplified than when Jesus says in Matthew 5:22 and 28, respectively, anyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And in 28, he says, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So as you can see, within the context of Christianity, certain emotions, whether it be lust, hatred, jealousy, and so on and so forth, are indicators of our moral worth. If we feel hatred toward our enemy, then we're bad. But if we feel love and joy, we're good. And I think within the context of Christianity, these emotions are good insofar as they ultimately serve God, and they're bad insofar that they serve our own selfish desires. However, I think framing emotions as either good or bad doesn't really make any sense. In fact, this leads to this term I came up with called moralizing emotions. Moralizing emotions is basically when we treat our emotions as indicators of our moral worth. And this can lead to all sorts of self-destructive habits. So let me give you a quick example from when I was a child. When I was in Christian private school through middle school, so between the ages of 7, well, not 7, that would be like first grade. But anyways, when I was in Christian school, I was taught this idea that I was supposed to love my enemies. And I really took this to heart. I took this seriously. So one day when my classmates in the gym locker room right before my PE class, they made fun of me for being skinny. They were a bit more bulkier than I was and more fit in their eyes. And this made me really angry. I, in fact, hated them for this. Yet, I was also told that I should love my enemies. And because of this idea, I actually felt guilty for hating them. Now, this type of hatred, self-hatred aimed at myself because I felt hatred, ironically, that led the guilt was a pattern that ended up repeating itself in my life over and over again. I'll get more into that later. But what I really want to highlight here is that as long as we tell ourselves that we should feel a certain way, we will always feel guilty when we inevitably don't feel that way. So I have a few examples here. So for example, if let's say a Christian is attracted to a woman, and then he interprets this as a feeling of lust. And then he also believes the idea that lusting after a woman is a form of adultery. What do you think the outcome of that will be? As another example, what if a Christian believes that she should honor her parents? Well, and in that she doesn't actually honor her parents because they are abusive, either verbally or physically. What do you think the result of that will be? These are just a few examples, but as you can see, the idea that we should just feel certain emotions doesn't really add up because emotions are just automatic aspects of ourselves. There's these things that automatically come out of us due to our values. And I think the basic pattern of moralizing emotions is the same. And this is something that you can use to identify it in yourself. It usually begins with, I feel this way, but you tell yourself in your thoughts, well, I shouldn't feel that way, or I should feel another way. And then this inevitably leads to guilt because you can't actually control your emotion in the moment. So this is kind of what I've identified through my own introspective practices and in my own life as this really destructive loop. And this actually continued even after I left Christianity and became an atheist. And it showed up in like weird areas of life. So like, for example, instead of focusing on writing an article, I would think to myself, man, I don't really feel inspired to write an article. But I know that I want to write an article in a certain sense of that term, but I'm just not feeling up to it. So I would wait until I'm inspired. But the problem is that inspiration would never come, and I would inevitably feel guilty for not having that emotion that I felt I should have. And this would repeat in other areas of life as well. So, for example, instead of asking a cute barista out on a date, or for her number, or whatever it is, I would instead wait until I felt right. But by telling myself that I should feel right before I do this thing, I would feel guilty for not feeling as I thought I should. So as you can see, this is a pattern of moralizing emotions that disrupted me in a variety of areas of my life, in my work, in my hobbies, in my romantic relationships, and so on and so forth. And so this is like a big problem that I think we should always take note of. Now, the point of this video isn't just to talk about how Christianity gets emotions wrong. It's also about how we can get emotions right. And I think if we just look at the reality of what emotions are, we can begin to piece together a picture of how we should approach them properly. So if we observe our emotions, we can see that they are these automatic reactions to our values, or a reaction to something that is against our values. So if you believe that dogs are dangerous for some reason, maybe you had a bad experience as a child, then when you see a dog, you might automatically have this emotion of fear because you have this idea about dogs that paints them as dangerous and leads to that emotion of fear. Or perhaps you believe I'm bad at math, but then you also believe that grades of a high caliber are a good thing. And when you go to take a math test, you'll inevitably feel anxious because you know that you think that you're bad at math, and at the same time, you want the value of good grades. And so in order to fix that, you would have to challenge one of those premises. Are you really bad at math? Or are grades even worth it? So these are just a few examples, but as you can see, emotions simply are, and they are a result of our past conclusions about reality, whether it be about the value of grades, or the danger of dogs, or anything. Any conclusion we make about something in respect to us as human beings, and whether it's life-serving or not life-serving, is where emotions come from. So emotions can kind of be boiled down to you thinking that something is for you or against you. And if it's for you, you feel good about it. If it's against you, then you feel bad about it, to really oversimplify it. So I think when we examine a religion through this lens of just looking at what the facts of emotions are, we can see that, this idea that emotions somehow are disobeying God. So if you feel hatred or you feel jealousy or you feel, I don't know, greed in a certain sense, where you just want to make a lot of money, which is a reasonable thing. Like it's not a bad thing to want to make money. Yet if you have too much of it, you're said to be disobeying God. This desire to have money is a form of disobedience. But questions really arise out of this. So God is usually taken to be a father in heaven as an analogy. Now, if we take this analogy and we think through it, would it be sane for a parent to tell a child that they are disobeying them because they feel a particular way? So if you're a child and you have parents and then you feel negatively about something, maybe something you just feel hateful towards, would it make sense for your parents to punish you or condemn you for feeling that way? Because that feeling allegedly is a form of disobedience? Not really. Sure, on one hand, your anger might be unjustified, but at the same time, you're a child. You can't possibly know what the right thing is to do, and sometimes you have conclusions about what's bad for you, and then you end up having anger. And parents who know what they're doing understand this and don't punish the child for having anger. Yet, this is exactly what Christianity calls us to do. That certain emotions should be ripped out of us. We shouldn't have hatred. We shouldn't have jealousy. We shouldn't have any of these things because they disobey God one way or another. Now, something else I want to talk about is, where does our moral status come from? How do we know we're good or bad as people? And I think the way we can observe this through a non-Christian lens and just look at the facts of reality here is, we're good insofar as we take actions that we consciously choose, which are good for us. And I don't want to get into a big tangent here, but in my view, I think that life is the standard of value, which basically means that when we're taking an action, an action is good insofar as that it serves our life, and it's bad insofar as it doesn't. And the reason for this is quite simple. We're living beings, and values don't exist in a vacuum. Things are only of value to you as a human being. So for example, if I have my jacket sitting over there on a chair, and would my jacket have any value if it wasn't my jacket or anybody's jacket, if it just was existing on its own in a vacuum? No. Values are of values to a who, a someone, a self. And so when we're thinking about whether or not an action is moral, it always has to come back down to, is it serving somebody's life or not? Who is it valuable for? Now, on the other hand, there's also things that we can't consciously control, which are totally different. So I'm reminded of this story where there is this man who had Tourette syndrome, and he was at, I think, an award show of sorts. He is unable to control what he says, and so when he was at this award show, there was a couple of black men there, and he started shouting the N-word at the top of his lungs. And this got him a lot of flack on social media. People criticized him for this. But I don't really think they should have, because he can't actually control this. How can he criticize someone for not being able to control their tongue? All of this isn't to say that we can't control our emotions. I think it's possible to control our emotions indirectly over a long period of time. But this takes challenging your ideas. So for example, if you're deathly afraid of dogs because a dog bit you as a child, and in order to fix this, you would have to continually expose yourself to that dog or a dog. And in doing this, you can eventually condition yourself to feel a different way about it through what psychologists call exposure therapy. And I think this basic pattern of changing your emotions over time and correcting them, so to speak, is completely possible. But I will add that in the moment of having an emotion, your current emotion is merely the outcome of your past conclusions about the world, whether those conclusions are conscious or not, which is kind of why it makes sense why we have certain emotions in adulthood, but that we think are just random. But I think the reason for these emotions is because at some point in childhood, we had made a conclusion or taken an action that really wasn't aligned with reality fully. And then we have an emotion that seems to get in the way as we get older. And the only way to fix this is in adulthood, identifying that emotion is not really helpful, and then over the long term, working on managing that emotion in a healthy way, which I think is what the entire field of psychotherapy is all about. It's about fixing your emotional management techniques so that you can act toward the values that you want in life. So, in light of these facts that emotions are automatic, and that our moral status is a result of our conscious choice, it just simply doesn't add up that our emotions are indicators of our moral status, as Christianity suggests they are. So Christianity distorts the meaning of emotions. Now I want to talk a bit more about how I've been integrating a facts view of emotions into my life. And I think one way I've been doing this is by engaging in radical self-acceptance. Now, what I mean by this is I accept my emotions as they come up in the moment, but I don't necessarily approve of the conclusion behind it. So our emotions, as I've indicated before, are just products of our ideas about the world. And if you're afraid of a dog, you have a certain idea about dogs that leads you to feel a certain way about them. And then the only way to fix that is to challenge that idea through exposure therapy. And I think by merely just accepting your emotions, so like if I feel a feeling of guilt, and if I accept this feeling of guilt, that's a good thing. But it doesn't mean I approve of the idea that I am guilty. So there's a difference between the two. And in doing this, it's helped me tremendously because I've been able to accept myself while denying the idea that I actually am guilty. So I can feel guilt without thinking that I am guilty, which allows me to actually process my emotions a lot more healthily. Now, besides accepting my emotions and challenging the conclusion that emotion leads me to, I also engage in what's called self-talk or self-parenting. I like to approach it this way, where I will treat myself, my emotional self, as the child that I am responsible for helping. So I almost put my conscious, rational mind in the driver's seat as the parent figure, and then my emotional side that's kind of like saying, I want that cookie from the cabinet, or I'm feeling guilty right now, I'm really bad. I try to talk out loud to myself about, with questions such as, how are you feeling? And why are you feeling that way? Basically giving myself the emotional guidance that I would want from a guardian figure in my life. And this has helped me tremendously because I'm able to reprogram my mind to talk to my emotional side in a much more compassionate and conscious manner. Now, if you've gotten this far in the video, you probably suspect that you moralize your emotions to some degree. You tell yourself, I should feel this way. And this leads to all sorts of guilt or possibly self-hatred. Now, I think we're all a bit different, so I would recommend taking some time to identify, where do I feel the most guilty for feeling a certain way? And then why do I feel guilty for feeling that way? Is it true that I am guilty? Or am I merely feeling guilt as a result of accepting an idea about what's good that might not be good? So basically, the two things here to take away are three things in a way, is accept your emotions, question your ideas that drive those emotions, and then use self-talk or self-parenting to facilitate that process. And I think that these three practices have helped me a lot, and hopefully they can help you as well.